Ari Aster only has 2 feature films, both written and directed by himself, but as mini short films. Looking at a few of these short films, we can see Aster's style develop. A strange thing about The Johnsons is Aster's first short film and shows the beginning of his fascination with dysfunctional families. This film showcases an abusive, incestuous relationship a son poses onto his father. In Aster's short film, The Trouble with Mum, we see Aster play around with the lighting and colours used. Some scenes contain bright colours with dreamy light, while others show a lack of light. Basically is another short film, but instead takes a more humorous approach than previous films.
FML, comma, I'm going to kill myself, exclamation mark, lol.
The lighting again in this film is warm and about the inner desire to be someone else, like Midsummer. Now, let's look at the similarities and difference between his full-length pieces. Hereditary and Midsummer are almost parallels of each other, sharing similar themes. The lighting on one film is dark, while the other is light. At the end of Hereditary, Peter is crowned the King Paimon, while in Midsummer, Danny is crowned the May Queen.
You are our May Queen.
A theme tying these films together is family. Midsummer and Hereditary both focus on grief and its impact on the family and how they function. Hereditary focuses on the downward spiral of a family. The grief sucks them in until it eventually consumes them. Midsummer takes a lighter approach to this situation and looks at new life after grief and accepting family from those around you, even if it does happen to be a cult. These films are existential horror and deal with fears that have no real remedy, different to the usual gore-filled horror movies. The lighting within Hereditary is mostly dark and eerie. The lighting shown in the film is harsh and minimum, with the majority taking place inside. The light in Midsummer is the complete opposite and is drowning in daylight and takes place outside. The film in its entirety is generally very bright. In Hereditary, Aster pushes the limits of how dark a film can be, and in Midsummer, he pushes the limits of how bright a film can be. The camera work in Midsummer is much more dynamic than Aster's previous feature. The framing in this film is much more symmetrical and stylized than Hereditary, with a specific color palette that is vibrant and rich. The soft-focused lighting in this film gives the colors a dreamlike quality, which makes the movie feel off-kilter. The acting in these films is phenomenal and helps transport the viewer to an entirely different place and experience what the character is feeling. In Midsummer, we see Danny in her most vulnerable state in many scenes when she is crying. In Hereditary, the key emotional scene is when the mother finally expresses her emotions towards her son at the dinner table.
Yeah, fine, release me. Just say it. Just fucking say it.
Don't you swear at me, you little shit! Don't you ever raise your voice at me! I am your mother! Do you understand? All I do is worry and slave and defend you, and all I get back is that fucking face on your face! So full of disdain and resentment and always so annoyed. Well, now your sister is dead.
Typically in horror movies, we see jump scares follow long shots. Instead, the first act of Hereditary plays out like a family drama. This half helps us establish the characters as an audience and see that this family is not quite average. There is an unusual girl, Charlie, who is obsessed with making creepy drawings and crafting puppets using parts of dead birds. The mother, Annie, who is grappling the recent death of her own mother and makes miniature versions of significant life events in diorama form. Peter, the son, who at first is normal but slowly descends after the loss of his sister and finger-pointing from his mother. In the beginning of Midsummer, we can also see the domestic setting up of the two protagonists, Danny and Christian. Early on, we learn that Christian is unhappy with the relationship and wants to break it off soon, and that Danny is going through grieving of her parents' and sister's deaths. The editing in Aster's films is generally very linear and have a definitive beginning and end. Aster himself is not keen on flashbacks and likes to play his films out in the times that they would occur naturally. Instead of flashbacks, Aster likes to hide symbols and entire plot points in the beginning of the film in a discreet way. The director's cuts of Aster's films are generally much longer than the theatrical release and harder to cut down due to his precise visions. These films then take on a more horror feeling in the second act, showing graphic scenes that impact the characters but happen very quick to the viewer. Aster's films focus less on the gore and more on the psychological impact that it has on the people who witnessed it. Sound can be seen in both films playing similar roles. The scores at the end of the movie from both films impact the viewer. When scoring Hereditary, Colin Stetson wanted to avoid certain ubiquitous tropes like synths and creepy percussion, and instead opted for clarinets, saxophone, his voice, and other unique options. This track brings out the thought of new dawns and life, whilst paralleling it with the horror and gore we have witnessed throughout the film. Midsummer heavily features chants and folk music because it is set in a Swedish midsummer festival. The music we hear at the end of the film is triumphant and sounds to have a glimmer of hope with its twinkles. Throughout both films we are able to see repeating sounds. For Hereditary it is Charlie's clicking, and for Midsummer it is the deep breath. In conclusion, we have seen the evolution of Aster in only 2 feature films by becoming more experimental with camera choices and exploring different aspects of the horror genre and style, and sometimes taking an indirect approach. Aster makes more than your average horror movie and explores the depths of human fears and the complexity of grief. If Aster's next film follows the formula he has used so far, we should see an unusual horror movie that tackles grief and has extreme lighting.